The story begins with a beautiful girl named Sarah, who was sitting in her car and talking to her boss. Sarah's boss was Chris, and she worked as his assistant. Chris was a famous movie star. People were crazy about him, eager to catch even a glimpse of him. Today he was having a debate with Sarah about something. Chris was a complete flirt. He would get into relationships with girls for a while and then break up with them by giving them an expensive gift. Even today, he had done the same with a girl named Shelley. And now he was asking Sarah to go to Shelley's house and bring back her underwear. Hearing this, Sarah started scolding him. She said, "I can't do this disgusting job anymore." From her words, it was clear that Sarah did not like working for Chris. After a while, Sarah arrived home. As soon as she walked in, she rested her head on her mother Livia's lap. She was exhausted from dealing with Chris and just wanted to relax in her mother's comfort. It was late at night. Sarah was in her room when she received a call from Chris. He wanted her to buy food for him. Since he couldn't go to the store himself without being surrounded by his fans, he relied on Sarah. Sarah quickly went to the store and started buying things, while Chris was still talking to her on the phone. He told her to bring the items and come to his house by 8 o'clock in the morning. However, Sarah got delayed because she went to meet her friend. Due to her late arrival, Chris refused to open the door. This made Sarah extremely angry. She left the door, forcibly entered Chris's house, and confronted him. "I have brought all your stuff," she said, "but now I really can't work for you anymore." She began packing her things. Chris tried to stop her, but Sarah refused to listen. The truth was, Chris constantly made her do useless tasks all day, and she had finally had enough. After some time, Sarah reached home and told her mother everything. "I quit Chris's job," she said. Livia comforted her, saying, "Do whatever you feel is right. I will always support you." Meanwhile, Chris was very upset without Sarah. He had grown used to making her handle all his work. After her departure, he realized just how much he had troubled her. The next day, he decided to visit Sarah at her house. Inside, Livia was cleaning while listening to music. After ringing the bell several times and getting no response, Chris let himself in. Hearing the door open, Livia assumed that a thief had entered the house. She immediately prepared to fight the intruder. But as soon as she looks at Chris, she panics because this is not a thief. In fact, this is her daughter, Sarah's boss, who has come to meet him. When Chris asks about Sarah, Livia tells him that she is not at home at the moment. Chris has important business with Sarah, so he decides to wait for her. Livia seats Chris and quickly goes to her room. She gets ready and then comes back in front of him. Meanwhile, Sarah is with her writer friend Molly. Back at home, Livia and Chris start walking around the house. When Chris asks about her, Livia says, "I am a writer. I have published many books." Chris is surprised to hear this because Sarah had never mentioned it to him. After exploring the house, the two of them start drinking. As they drink, they engage in deep conversation. Livia confesses, "10 years ago, my husband died in an accident. Since then, I haven't let any man come close to me. I've even forgotten how to play." They have had a little too much to drink, which leads them to get closer. Chris starts teaching her how to play. After 10 years, for the first time. Overcome with passion, she falls onto Chris. She takes him to her room and starts playing games. Just as things heat up, Sarah arrives home. Absent-mindedly, she pops a grape into her mouth and calls out for Livia while walking toward her room. As soon as she opens the door, she is horrified to see her mother and Chris. She screams loudly and the grape gets stuck in her throat. She stumbles backward, collides with the wall and falls unconscious. A while later, Sarah is in the hospital. She demands that her mother stay away from her boss. However, Livia dismisses her concern, saying, "You don't have to be so upset. We were just quenching our thirst." Just then, the doctor enters and starts examining Sarah. Shortly after, Chris also arrives. Because of his fame, a crowd of his fans has gathered in the waiting room. As soon as the doctor sees Chris, he forgets his work and excitedly starts talking to him because he too is a huge fan. Sarah, seeing this, becomes furious. A while later, when Chris returns home, Chris tells Sarah, "I want you to come back to work," but Sarah refuses. She says, "If I come back to work now, people will say that my mother slept with my boss to get me this job." Chris explains to her, "I didn't come here to quench my thirst with your mother. In fact, I really came to meet you." Sarah tells her boss, "What you did with my mother should never happen again." Hearing this, Chris promises her, "This will never happen." A few days later, Chris was shooting and Sarah was with him. That same night, Livia was working on her new book when she suddenly received a message from Chris. He wanted to meet Livia, but she refused. Chris insisted, "I just want to talk to you." Hearing this, she agreed. She got ready and went to meet Chris. Meanwhile, Sarah was working on Chris's script with Molly. At the same time, Livia was with Chris in a hotel room. Both of them promised each other that what happened that day would never happen again. They vowed to keep their desires under control. After dinner, they started drinking. As they drank, the heat between them began to rise again. Eventually, they forgot their promise and gave in to their desires once more. Chris lost himself in Livia's embrace. Late at night, when Livia returned home, she ran into Sarah. Upon asking, Livia told her, "I went out for dinner with Chris." Sarah asked, "Did you only have dinner, or was there something more?" Hearing this, Livia tried to explain, "Chris is a good person. You're misunderstanding him." After saying this, she went to her room and called her mother-in-law to talk about Chris. She also mentioned Sarah, saying that she didn't like Chris simply because he was her boss. Livia's mother-in-law told her, "If you like Chris, then you don't need to listen to anyone else." Livia felt really good after talking to her mother-in-law. She also decided to move forward with Chris. They both fell in love with each other. They spent the whole day together, had fun, and whenever they got the chance, they indulged in their passion. They were truly happy with each other. Whereas Sarah still didn't like her boss, one evening, she discovered that Livia was writing a script for Chris. Seeing this, she became extremely angry at her mother because Livia had not told her anything about it. On the other hand, Livia was at a party with Chris. Livia tried to make her understand, but Sarah's anger was at its peak. She didn't want to listen to anything Livia had to say. Livia also became angry and started saying harsh things to her in return. Following this heated argument, Sarah left her house and went to her friend's place. Meanwhile, Livia went to her mother-in-law's house to celebrate Christmas. After some time, Sarah also arrived at her grandmother's house so that the whole family could celebrate Christmas together. Despite this, Sarah was still upset with Livia. She told her grandmother that Chris was not a good man. Hearing this, her grandmother explained to her that ever since her father's death, Livia had never thought about herself. She had always cared only about Sarah. If she had now fallen in love with Chris, they should be happy for her and support her. Just then, Sarah's eyes fell on Livia, who was welcoming Chris. That night, the entire family sat down to eat together. Livia's mother-in-law also took a liking to Chris, and Chris was equally delighted to meet her. After dinner, Livia and her mother-in-law had a conversation. Livia confided in her, revealing that Sarah's father had wanted to divorce her because he was having an affair with another woman. However, he died before the divorce could happen, and no one ever found out about his affair. The next day, after celebrating Christmas, everyone started heading back. As Sarah was placing things in Chris's car, she noticed the same gift that Chris used to give to women whenever he broke up with them. Realizing this, Sarah understood that he was now planning to break up with her mother. At first, Sarah didn't say anything, but when they all returned home, she couldn't hold back any longer. She showed Livia the gift and told her, whenever Chris breaks up with someone, he gives them this exact gift, and now he is going to do the same with you. Livia believes what Sarah says and tells Chris to leave her house. A few days later, the new year arrives, but no one is happy. Meanwhile, Sarah goes to Chris's house to meet him. There, Chris tells her, "I didn't want to break up with your mother. I love her very much. Shelley returned that gift, and I forgot to take it out of the car." Sarah also realizes that Chris is a good person and truly loves her mother. To cheer him up, she takes him to a store. On the other hand, Sarah's grandmother takes Livia to the same store. As soon as Livia walks in, she sees Chris, and both of them are surprised to see each other. In reality, this was all part of the grandmother's plan to bring Livia and Chris back together. Sarah apologizes to both of them for her mistake and leaves. At the end of the story, Livia forgives Chris, and with that, this story comes to an end. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you love videos like this, please subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video. Until then, take care.